Good morning. My name is Ivory. I just want to welcome you here this morning on behalf of the White Fund. The White Fund has been hosting a lecture series in the city of Lawrence for over 150 years. A judge from this area, his name is Daniel Appleton White. He created this through an indenture when he passed away. And the indenture was specifically for the young people of Lawrence. So it's great to see so many young faces out here today. And the nice thing about Judge White was, at that time was really a man's world. We talk about how hard it is for women, especially on International Women's Day. But in his indenture, he specifically said he wanted to have a lecture series that would enlighten the minds of the young men and young women. He was very specific to include young women. And it's something I've always been very proud of to be affiliated with. And I think it's fantastic that on International Women's Day, we are hosting a White Fund lecture, and it is full of young women. So that's fantastic. I am going to introduce Maria Hernandez. She is going to introduce our speaker. I want to thank you all for being here today and just tell you a little bit about the White Fund. So thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. So I'm just going to stand back here. It's a little bit more comfortable for me, but I want to say good morning to everyone that's here. And it's just great to see so many faces from the community. And thank you, Eileen, for giving that little introduction on the White Fund. And as she said, we're here to commemorate International Women's Day, whose theme this year is Each for Equal. I'm very excited and privileged to have this opportunity to introduce our guest speaker today, Dr. Lorgia García-Peña. But before I give you a little bit of background on Lorgia, I want to just let you know that before you leave today, we do have some journals that everybody can take on their way out and some flowers. And afterwards, we can have some pizza and some cake. Okay? So that's something to look forward to. Yummy. Everyone, yay! All right. So Dr. Garcia-Peña is a Roy Claus Associate Professor of Latinx Studies at Harvard University and the co-founder of Freedom University in Georgia. She specializes in Afro-Latinx studies. Her research poses a dialogue among feminist theory, transnational Blackness, and Caribbean thought, paying close attention to the intersections between coloniality, migration, and racial ethnic identity formation. Dr. Garcia-Peña's first book, The Borders of Dominicanidad, Race, Nations, and Archives of Contradictions, won the 2017 National Women's Studies Association Gloria E. Anzaldúa Book Prize, the 2016 LASA Latina Studies Book Award, and the 2016 Isis Duarte Book Prize in Haiti and Dominican Studies. Her core book project, Translating Blackness, the va-y-ven and detours of Latinx colonialities in global perspective, looks at how Black Latinx migrants and their descendants grapple with various racial systems, finding ways to translate the racial meaning across national contexts while carving a space of belonging and representation within the nations that often exclude them. Dr. Garcia-Peña received a PhD in American Culture from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and an MA in Latin American and Latino Literatures from Rutgers University. Today, Dr. Garcia-Peña will be reflecting on her life and career and talking about her background, how her background has formed her journey as a Latinx Studies, Ethnic Studies scholar. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Lorgia García-Peña. Buenos días.
Buenos días.
Yo sé que no han comido todavía, pero buenos días. Thank you, Maria, for the lovely introduction, and thank you so much for the warm welcome. I'm really excited to be here. I'm also very excited to go and shop for plátanos after. The task of giving a keynote is both an honor. Entren, come on in. There are more chairs right here. There's some chairs in the front. Okay. So the task of giving a keynote is always both a great honor and a great responsibility, as speakers are charged with not only sharing a little bit about
our work, but hopefully igniting questions and inquietudes that will continue to shape your experience throughout the day, throughout the time here in college. And this particular invitation has been incredibly humbling and inspiring for me, not only because I get to share a little bit of myself with you, con mi gente, but also because we're commemorating el Día Internacional de la Mujer, International Women's Day, which necessarily means an invitation to reflect on women's role in society and the legacies of feminisms, and more importantly, the retos, the challenges, and the triunfos, the accomplishments of the many women who have made it possible for you and for me to share this room today. So if you would allow me to, I want to dedicate this intervention today to a very special woman, Doña Maritza Peña, mi mamá, who, although not physically present in this room, and she figured out the link she might be watching, is always a force, a presence, and an inspiration in everything I do. My mom, Doña Maritza, is from Baní. Anybody from Baní here? Una. Okay. She grew up in a family of 9 kids and was one of the oldest, so she was charged with caring for her small siblings, working the fields, and taking care of the household work. In that process, she became a feminist. And I want to pause here a second to clarify what I mean. Because typically when we study feminisms or the feminist movement, we tend to focus on radical actions, the political interventions, which were so key in the creation and sustenance of structures of equality in the world for women's rights, from women's rights to vote, to abortion, to equal pay, important rights we still continue to fight for in this day and age. The thing is, however, that when looking at feminism only through those, only through that lens, we tend to exclude the multiple ways in which women, particularly women of color, living in highly patriarchal societies like the Dominican Republic, confronted everyday life, structures of inequality, like my mother, who never went out with a poster board to protest, but whose actions were profoundly transformational, both within her family and her at-large community. So my mother is a feminist. The first feminist in my family, I would dare say, and she became one at the age of 10, when she first confronted her father for the right to schooling, her right to learn, and the fair distribution of labor in the house. 6 years later, at the age of 16, after finishing a technical degree, she confronted her extended family for the right to work, something she continued to do until her retirement at the age of 65. But most importantly, my mother's feminism manifested through her praxis as a mother. She taught my sister and I to be strong, to be vocal, to occupy space, to interrupt men, to be malcriadas, to sit at the head of the table, to demand equal treatment, equal pay, equal rights. She taught us not to settle for less. She taught us we don't need a man, that we are enough. And most importantly, she taught us that solidarity, particularly women's solidarity, is not only a means of survival, it is how we thrive. It is how we win. All of this she taught me by example. Gracias, Mami. I share this with you today because I was invited to talk about my path in academia. And I think it's essential to highlight the importance of the length of that path. Of the fact that many people actually, mostly women, paved the way for me and for you to be here today. So when you see me standing in front of you, I want you to imagine a long road behind me of Dominican women, of women of color, from my mother to Mamá Tingó, con escobas, con palos, con machetes, clearing the path so it became a little easier for me to walk on it. And once you do that, I also want you to imagine from this moment on, and I'm speaking to the young students here, imagine me and others doing the same for you. So when it feels like this is all too hard or not worth it, remember you're not doing it alone. We're in this together. Remember also that you're doing this for yourself, but also for those who came before you, and most importantly, para los que vienen después, those who come after you. That is a responsibility we all share together as a community. It is, I truly believe so, the only way forward. So my talk today is structured to follow the same mandate of looking both behind and forward. I will share a little bit about my path, how I got here, and I will share with you a bit about the ways in which that path has inspired my teaching and my research as a Latinx studies and ethnic studies scholar, and how I see the future of the field. Does that sound like a good plan? Mm-hmm. Yes. All right then. So I came to the US at the age of 12. I was born in Santo Domingo, in a barrio, and coming at the age of 12 made me what some call generation and a half, which basically means con un pie aquí y el otro allá. Like many of us, I went to schools that had many challenges, from drugs to teen pregnancies to higher dropout than higher graduation rates. My parents did not speak English. They did not understand the higher education system, nor did they have any means to pay for college tuition or support any of my aspirations financially, that is. So I went to college, like so many immigrant kids, with a desire to improve my socioeconomic status and that of my family. I wanted to get a degree, get a job, make money. In the process, however, that desire transformed for me into something bigger. As I took classes after classes and after classes and found nothing that reflected my experience, my history, I became more aware of the gap and the distance between academia and my community. That distance became more evident and bigger as I entered graduate school, as my socioeconomic status, my immigrant background, my race, the fact that I was a second language learner, the fact that I had not had the opportunities that other kids had had, private classes, SAT courses, all of that marked me as different and defined in many ways my feeling of not belonging to the university, to academia, and to the future. So I had two choices. I could try to fit in, to change, to adapt to the ways of belonging that were acceptable, otherwise known as selling out. Or I could try to change the structures of exclusion that made it so my history was not in books, so the feminism of my mother was erased, and I chose the latter. So my academic path, I can say, has been both profoundly personal, in that it has grounded me and he has been grounded and moved by my own experiences of exclusion, from books to institutions, to the very nation that I live in, and also highly communal, in that it was grounded on the feminism of my mother, a desire for change in my community, a desire for social justice, and perhaps a stubborn but radically hopeful conviction that education can and should be transformative. Otherwise, what is the point of all of us being here? So my journey to obtaining a PhD in Latino studies and eventually becoming a professor was grounded on that commitment to social justice, to finding answers to questions that emerged from my experience as a Dominicana, Latina, immigrante, confronting everyday racism and sexism. It was that commitment that led me to academia, to teaching. So social justice is both the method and the impetus for my journey through Latino and ethnic studies. Writing at the turn of the 20th century, Black Puerto Rican scholar Arthur Schomburg, advocated for the creation of departments of Black history and for Black people to become historians as a way to contrast the lies, the silences, and the violence produced about Black and brown people in the university. His proposal was to reintroduce, and I quote Schomburg, that which slavery took away, the possibility of humanity and belonging. My field of teaching and research, Latinx studies, and more broadly, ethnic studies, is charged with the immeasurable task of returning to us what slavery took away, filling the gaps left by Eurocentric fields of knowledge that make up academic departments, and creating a learning environment that contrasts white supremacy, inequality, racism, and exclusion that dominate the canons, the libraries, the archives, and our classrooms. How many of you went to high school here? How many of you learned about the histories of your parents' country or your countries in this high school? 3 people. How many of you learned about the literature of people that look like you in your English classes? How many of you learned about the geographies of the people and histories of your countries or your people, or people that look like you? So the role of ethnic studies is to fill those silences that have been left in what we call education, which in reality is Eurocentric white education. So, ethnic studies privileges those who have been left out of books or produced as less human, less capable, less worthy of study. What could possibly be more important in our learning and our teaching? Yet over the years, and particularly as I enter the world of tenure track, and tenure track is the process through which professors who are teaching in a university obtain tenure, which means you have a job permanently. But it also affords you the freedom to teach in particular ways, right? To not think that you're going to lose your job if you say the things I'm saying in front of you right now. Yet, over the years, and in particular as I enter the world of tenure track, my commitment to social justice from the founding of Freedom University, which is an organization that I created with other people that provides college instruction to undocumented students who have been banned from access in education in the state of Georgia, to the public disobedience actions that led to my arrest, to the work with queer communities of color, to my commitment to Haitian rights in the Dominican Republic. All of this has often been met with both caution and trepidation by colleagues and well-meaning advisors who say things like, shouldn't you wait until you have tenure to be so vocal about X, Y, and Z? Probably good advice. Is it safe for you to be so open about your politics in the classroom? What I would have loved to dismiss these questions, the increased violations of academic freedom that left some ethnic studies colleagues out of work or otherwise hindered their careers through tenure denials, were simply too many to dismiss. The cautionary tales and well-meaning advice reflect the widely accepted idea that while professors and teachers are indeed expected to be politically and civically engaged and informed, there needs to be a clear separation between said engagement and their research and teaching in order to retain academic integrity or a sense of objective knowledge. But how do we separate our teaching from our practices when the communities we studied and serve are under attacks? And further, when we are part of those communities. How do we study the historical violence experienced by our communities while simultaneously staying silent as families are separated, as people are deported, as young people go to prison, as schools are defunded, as neighborhoods are gentrified, as people die? Don't we, as scholars and teachers, have a responsibility to work for social justice? To work towards returning, like Schomburg asked us to do, a little of what slavery took away? Education, the arts, the humanities have always been sites of social political engagement. in part due to the freedom of creativity and creation they afford us, and in part because the arts, education, humanistic programs are often the first institutional sites to feel the effects of neoliberal politics, budget cuts, personnel reductions, etc. And yet I also understand that commitment to social justice, whether it is in the classroom, in your community, in your church, or in your family, or in grassroots organizing, has many faces. Commitment to social justice, or what some call activism, emerges from a deeply personal place that cannot always be named. Therefore, my intention here, and I want to be very clear here, is not to invite you to be activists or to provide a method for engaging in social justice or feminism or in your learning and in your teaching, but rather I want to share some of the deeply personal lessons that I have learned in my own crooked by men through learning Latinx studies in the multiple and very different institutions and classrooms in which I have inhabited, from Freedom University to Harvard. So my purpose is then to invite a dialogue about the possibilities that can emerge if we foreground social justice as a clear goal in our learning and in our teaching. This is a question that I always, do we not have the PowerPoint?
Yeah, I'm going to send it right now. Should be coming.
There it comes.
Okay,
Okay.
there we go.
Check the box.
Yep. This is a question I ask myself always. What is the work I want my work to do? So, one of the classes I teach regularly at Harvard is called Performing Latinidad, and it's a course that I developed my first semester teaching as an assistant professor there in 2013. And it has become a sort of sanctuary for first-generation students of color. Now, Harvard doesn't have a department, program, or center for Latino studies. It does not provide students of color with a meeting space or any type of center for community events. So for many students, the classroom, and in particular the Latinx or the ethnic studies classroom, has become such space. It is in these courses that students meet each other, they build alliances, they network, that allows them to confront the violence of their environment. So Performing Latinidad, what it does is it examines the constructions, imaginings, and representations of Latinidad as performed in the different genres of studies like poetry, fiction, drama, music, slam, and film. And we do this in conversation with historical and social political moments that have defined the history of the United States. So by bringing Latino studies criticism, border theories, feminism in question and in conversation, we address issues of identity, notions of citizenship, language authenticity, representation, and belonging. But because the class has a hands-on performance on an art-making component, it is also incredibly engaging for students of all levels and all kinds of different fields. So I have students who are in the health, or who are in technical degrees, or who are doing engineering, but they all come together because they're looking for a space to connect, and they're looking for a space to examine their histories. So every semester, students enrolled in Performing Latinidad work with a visiting artist to develop an artistic intervention based on readings from the class. Students look forward to their final performances, as they're one of the only and rare instances in which they become visible in a campus that's invisibilized. Now, the majority, Harvard is a very elite university. It's a university where a lot of people are very rich. I joke that one of my students carries a purse that's more expensive than my car. And it's not even funny, but it is. And so imagine coming from our communities, coming from communities that are not rich, who coming from immigrant communities into an environment where that is the norm. So that's incredibly isolating for first-generation students of color. All around campus, there are statues such as this one that you see, the John Harvard statue, and photographs of imposing large life-size photographs of important white men, right? And so this is around the classrooms, this is around the campus, and students of color and women students do not ever see themselves reflected. So one of the things that students do in this class is that they take space. And they bring all of their experiences from home, the questions they have, in connection with the readings that we do, and they create an artistic intervention. And we typically bring a performer artist from the region that can work with them. And so I have some pictures here that I like to show because they're kind of fun, and they're all from different years. So in the middle of the screen on the bottom left, there is one that reflects, this is from 2015. So the students decided to create an altar to Santa J-Lo. And it was based on a reading that I read. They had read an article, so it actually had some context with the class. We read an article that's called Jennifer's Butt, that it's about the role of the image of Jennifer Lopez in the construction of sort of a unified feminist Latina identity. And it's a pretty old article, and so they read that, and they also saw the film Selena. And one of the groups came up with this idea. What was interesting about it is that the statue stayed, and you can see the snow. So this happened around this time of the year, and so it became a shrine for ethnic studies prayers and ofrendas, with letters and notes to San J-Lo asking to intercede on behalf of Latinx students, asking Mr. Harvard to finally provide, and I quote one of the letters, a space for Latino students, approval for a concentration in a department, and the hiring of professors in the field of ethnic studies. The shrine became a site of activism and representation for Latinx and other students of color on campus, who guarded the shrine and brought flowers, candles, and other offerings to demand el milagro. And the shrine remained in place over a week due to the complicit relationship between the Latino students and the custodial staff charged with removing it. A year later, amidst the presidential election campaign, students enrolled in Performing Latinidad decided that their theme for the final performance was going to be taco trucks in every corner of the Harvard yard. Now, challenging the then popularized controversial statement by Marcos Gutierrez, as some of you might remember, co-founder of Latinos for Trump, God save him, that if you don't do something about it, we're going to have taco trucks in every corner, as if that was something that would be bad. Anyways, over the fall semester, each of the 6 groups prepared, under the direction of Dominican performer artist Josefina Baez, an installation and a performative text based on the class readings that spoke to both the overarching topic of the class and to the specific intervention, the taco trucks, they had chosen for the performance. And part of it is that this happened the week of elections. So this is actually elections day, because I taught on a Tuesday. And you can see some of the other photos from that performance. So right in the middle, you see they poor John Harvard. They do all kinds of things to that statue, but there is Taqueria Harvard, and he is, for the visual installation, student built cardboard trucks that moved through the campus sharing poetry tacos with people and passerby that were based on the readings. It was quite beautiful, actually, and very engaging to everyone on campus. Students wrote original text, made installations on various trees, and even transformed the iconic John Harvard statue into a bad hombre sculpture that challenged the rhetoric of the Trump campaign, as well as the language of the Harvard administration that continued to refuse the creation of an ethnic studies department despite the 47 years of student protest. So the performative intervention breached the larger political climate that was very personal to students, and 50% of my students were undocumented in that class, with the local campus climate, exposing the hypocrisy of the university in its refusal to recognize Latinx studies as a legitimate field of inquiry while simultaneously celebrating the strides of diversity and inclusion. The energy of the students brought to campus was contagious. In the final moments of the performance, students staged a procession that was joined by students, faculty, and tourists. There was a whole bunch of tourists that did not know what was happening, and they just kept walking with us. So, hey, it was a triumphant day, and everyone felt great about the work done. And then at the morning of the next class meeting, in which we were supposed to unpack the performance and think critically about the work done and how everyone felt about it, we woke up with the news that Trump had been elected president. So that Wednesday morning, I struggled with the decision of whether or not to cancel class, as many of my colleagues had done. We were encouraged to do that by the administration of the university. It was an overwhelming day, a day of mourning, and a scary day for many of my mostly Black, brown, and queer and undocumented students enrolled in Performing Latinidad. I simply just didn't have the words or wisdom that could assuage their fears, even a little. And so as I searched for an answer in my syllabus as to what the hell to do that day in class, I stumbled upon an essay by Barbara Tollemson and George Lipsitz entitled American Studies as an Accompaniment. In it, the authors argued that scholars need to, and I quote, know the work we want our work to do, and how our scholarship can serve to accompany positive changes in our society. If we actually want to dismantle the oppressive systems that have persistently reproduced inequality in a time of terror. So I thought about the work I wanted my teaching to do that day. The reason why I became a teacher was to enact social change, to create the kind of classroom that was denied to me, a first-generation Dominicana Latina immigrante from Trenton, New Jersey. So my commitment to students was thus grounded in justice and in the hope for the impact that I wanted students to have in their communities, starting in the classroom and expanding beyond it. So instead of canceling class, I decided to open my classroom to all students of color who needed a place to process what it meant for them to now be forced to live in this very scary world. I decided to accompany them, trusting that the community we had worked to co-create the past several months would hold us. And as I stood in front of that Harvard lecture of 80-something students that morning, I was reminded once again of the power of community. Students came in holding each other, many cried, and for the first 40 minutes of class, we allowed ourselves to just feel fear, anxiety, express anger, or just simply listen. I did my best to make sure students felt safe in the classroom by setting the tone for respectful processing. And at the beginning of class, I made the following, maybe for some of you, controversial announcement. I said, if you voted for Trump or sympathize with his narrative and politics, this is simply not your space today. You may leave, or you may sit silently. This is a safe space for people who may not feel safe anywhere else today. And so I told everyone, nothing we say here leaves this classroom today. There were many undocumented students enrolled in my course who woke up terrified that they would be deported and persecuted. My first priority that day was to make sure they felt safe to speak if they chose to, at least during the duration of my class. That's the space I control. And they did speak. And we all listened. And we listened to their fears, we listened to their stories, we listened to their sobs. Then, when they were done, I asked the class, what now? What do you do in the space that you inhabit here at Harvard to support our most vulnerable in the community? How do we hope and how do we learn amidst this fear? What is the work you need to do? What followed will stay with me forever. One student got up and went to the board and began writing as her peers shared the most urgent needs they saw in their community to protect undocumented students on campus. They continued working after class, and within 3 hours, they had drafted a document that would be adopted nationally, calling for university campuses to become sanctuaries. Some of you might have seen that floating, to protect their undocumented peers from violence that was to come. Their actions, their accompaniment went beyond class. It extended for several years as they continued to organize and think together through writing, through discussions, through teachings, and eventually through rallies, civil disobedience, and media interventions. Their actions led to the founding of an organization in support of undocumented students on campus, and to forcing the university to create resources, including hiring staff, providing legal support, and financial resources for DACA renewal fees. Recently, I reflected on those early post-election days with a student who has since graduated and become a union organizer, about the experiences, what the experiences have been like for students like herself in the class. And she said to me, and I quote, "The syllabus gave us the tools, and the class gave us the community. The method for organizing was always in the class." Let's see, yeah, it's working. Social engagement and community-grounded learning have always been at the center of Latino, whether it's Chicano, Puerto Rican, and Latino studies since its formation in the 1960s. The 1960s Chicano student workouts in the west of the United States led to the founding of the first Chicano studies program in San Francisco State, now 50 years standing. In the 1970s, the sit-ins and demonstration in the Northeast also led to Puerto Rican and Hispanic Caribbean programs at Rutgers, CUNY, and Hunter. And most recently, the actions at Williams College, Wesley College, and Yale University in New England resulted in the hiring of Latinx Studies faculty and the creation of ethnic studies programs. Yet while we know this history, how that commitment translates to the everyday life of our students in the classroom is less evident, though no less important. The examples of this post-election class, inspiring as it is also exceptional. The political circumstances, the campus environment in post-election 2016, and the performative nature of the class allowed for these expressive forms of activism that would have proven difficult or less natural, at least, in a more traditional classroom and in a different political climate. So what I want to highlight as a lesson for thinking about Latinx studies teaching as a method for social justice is not the performative political interventions of my students, from the rallies to the taco trucks, nor the administrative responses to their activism, from the funding to the staff support, but rather the more tacit elements that led to their accompaniment, to their working together, to what my student identified in her own reflection as the class as a method for seeking justice through acompañamiento. I want to reflect on how to move from individual faculty-led initiatives to broader collective and collaborative projects that can accompany structural and lasting changes in our communities and beyond. The concept of accompaniment or acompañamiento comes from Central American liberation theory and activism. It relates to the idea that social change is a process that is not given to people, but that emerges from people. Allies cannot create social change, but they can accompany it with patience and courage. They can walk together and participate in the creation of social changes. Accompaniment opposes a traditional neoliberal model of competitive labor market and NGO-driven development in which progress is brought to the community rather than emerging from within. This dominant neoliberal model has failed in moments of crisis, even when those implementing it are well-intentioned. We've seen it in the failures to reconstruct Haiti after the earthquake, or even in post-Katrina in New Orleans. In this increasingly market-driven world, we are encouraged to think of ourselves as individuals, as owners of our lives, identities, careers. We own our courses, our research, our syllabi. We want that A. We are each, as such, responsible for our own successes and our own failures, from passing the class, to graduation, to getting that job, to obtaining a promotion. That's on us. The dominant reward structures in society, and in school in particular, promote competitive practices that, rather than collectivity and accompaniment. In the classroom, this often manifests in students' desire to protect their work, their research, and their sense of authorship. My paper, right? For faculty, it manifests in the secretive way in which information about tenure processes, hiring practices, fellowship, publishing, etc., seems to never reach everyone equally, hindering opportunities for advancement and development, particularly for junior women, faculty of color, and first-generation faculty. So to contrast this toxic environment of individuality, we need to turn back to accompaniment, to the collective, open sharing of knowledge and resources, to a way of doing our work that promotes the growth of everyone, well-being of all involved. We need to reject the practice of individual success. There has never been an easier time to do this with the wide access to information and an online community. Accompaniment needs to be at the center of how we learn, at the center of our organizations, our departments, and our classrooms. We know that our work as learners and teachers and scholars grows through collective conversations. Otherwise, we wouldn't all be sitting in a classroom together. Conversations with our peers, conversation with our audience. The same is true of active learning in and out of the classroom. However, to learn together, it is first necessary to trust one another, to feel comfortable and secure in the space that we inhabit in the classroom, to know our ideas are respected, that they won't be dismissed as silly or stupid, and to appreciate the significance of everyone's voice, rejecting the dominance of a single voice. We've all been at one point or another the only one or one of a few of our ethnicity, our gender, or our race. We have had to learn our own histories as a side project, and we've been asked to speak for the collective due to our presumed expertise, which is based solely on occupying a racialized body. And by the way, the number of times people have asked me about baseball, because I'm Dominican, if I just had $1 for each of those. So to develop a trusting community in the classroom, I begin by acknowledging these traumas as I experience them myself, while also inviting students to strive to create with me a different kind of learning environment. Together, we create simple rules for respecting one another that go from not dominating a conversation to checking our own privileges and subject positions before posing questions. So there are 3 requirements that I have in my courses, and I'm speaking to teachers now. Number 1, everyone must learn each other's names, regardless of the size of the class. I don't care if it's 500. We'll take all semester to do that. We read together. We read together as a class, in the class. We create reading groups that meet outside of class, and we keep doing the exercise throughout the semester. We do group projects. While there are individual reflections and papers and such, the majority of assignments in my class are done in groups. These are challenging at first, as students have to let go of their own ways of understanding grades and authorship, but prove rewarding as they learn to rely on each other's strengths, make each other accountable, and learn to make room for each other's mistakes. Throughout the semester, all assignments, all of them, are peer-reviewed. All writing begins with workshops, and students slowly learn to become invested in collective learning as a philosophy of the classroom demands that we accompany each other and make it together to the end of the term. In a society that constantly urges people to have more, I want to remind us that the real task is to learn how to be more. Collective learning teaches us how to be more through accompanying others. Students come in the classroom with a diversity of experiences and perspectives, tapping into that rich diversity can be a powerful contradiction to the academic culture of individuality, as well as an important way of bridging the gap between our community and the university walls, of promoting a democratic form of learning that extends beyond the classroom. For me, this type of teaching and learning gives me hope. The kind of hope that philosopher Jonathan Lear qualifies as radical, as it encompasses the possibility of change for the world we want to create rather than the one we inherited. Lear writes, and the quote is on the screen, "What makes this hope radical is that it is directed toward a future goodness that transcends the current ability to understand what it is. Radical hope is not so much something you have, but something you practice. It demands flexibility, openness, and what Lear describes as imaginative excellence. Radical hope is our best weapon against despair. And as Junot Díaz reminds us, even when despair seems justifiable, it makes the survival of the end of our world possible. Díaz writes that, and I quote, "Only radical hope could have imagined people like us into existence." And I believe it will help us create a better, more loving future. To hope radically thus means to act amidst the logic of war, of cultural devastation, enacting effective changes for the next generation. Remember that line? Teaching practices that are progressive, that ask about the work we want our work to do, allows us to confront trauma, the feeling of loss, that which slavery took away. It allows us, both teachers and students, to connect and to understand what we do and why we do it. Latinx studies as a field, as do other ethnic studies, exists within a framework of radical hoping. As an antidote to the white supremacist exclusionary teaching and learning many of us are still trying to recover from. Whether we are explicit about it or not, our teaching, what we teach, demands that students think of themselves as actors and relate to the reading from a personal space, from what Latina feminist writer Cherry Moraga called the flesh. When teaching Latino students and other students of color, it becomes even more urgent to make that relationship with the text explicit, to acknowledge the affective link that exists between the subject of study and the subject position. That acknowledgement does not distance us from critical dialogue, but rather opens the possibility for a more sincere critique that leads us to action in and out of the classroom. It allows us as teachers to create classroom environments that are free from violence and that guarantee the protection of the most vulnerable. A classroom where collective learning takes precedence over individual success. The lessons I've learned in the 15 years I have been teaching Latinx studies transfer to both my research and my life praxis. They guide my actions and my thoughts, both in and out of the classroom. They bring with me that long row of women of color, mi mamá, mi abuela, but also my teachers, the artists that inform my work. In a path that often pulls us in so many different directions, it is easy to lose sight of why we do what we do and how we got here. Teaching and learning for justice, asking ourselves what work we want our work to do, can serve as a reminder that there is a goal that connects us, all of us, beyond our career paths, our individual responsibilities, the justice and equality of all human beings. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions, and there are some seats here in the front, and I did shower today, so you can sit without fear.
Anybody have any questions?
The little one has a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see a hand.
Who come into a particular country, the U.S. or otherwise, who want to leave their heritage, but then when they confront individuals of their own heritage, they are discriminated against because they are not fully embracing their heritage.
So my comment at the beginning had less to do with your individual choice of culture or heritage, with which again it's a position of privilege. The fact that you're able to leave the heritage behind already implies the amount of privilege that you have to be able to do that, which is something that was not afforded to a lot of people. So the comment had to do more with if coming from a particular community, right, an impoverished community, whether you're an immigrant or not, that could mean so many different things. It just I had quite a few white students from Appalachia who are struggling with the same kind of questions. It's a question of coming from an impoverished community, being the first person out of your neighborhood or your community or your family to ever go to college, and finding yourself with this decision, right? What do I do? What do I do? And it's a very difficult decision that I think people face multiple times through their life. Like, what do I do now? And that's a very individual decision. For some people, their survival, whether it is because they're coming from a particularly violent family situation, it might just mean I cannot look back. But that doesn't mean you cannot look forward. So I think whatever your individual decision about your personal identity, that's very personal, and that has to do with you. But that doesn't exclude you from the responsibility for the future. Right? That doesn't exclude you from serving your students and your student demographics the way they deserve to be served. Right? So if you're from a particular cultural background, you find yourself with a classroom of students that are coming from a very different background than yours, your responsibility is not to your background, it's to theirs. Right? So I have a majority of my students are Chicanos, I'm Dominican. So my responsibility is to teach them that. That's what it's kind of. Okay.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Susan, and I'm studying here as sleep technologist, and I work and study too. As an immigrant, I have this question because I know that you are a successful person. So, do you have trouble with the race problem? And if you have it, cómo pudiste sobrepasar eso? Yeah. Yeah. ¿Y cómo pudiste superar esa parte para llegar a ser successful?
So the question is, how have I overcome the race problem? And I have not overcome the race problem because it's not my problem. We have the problem of white supremacy and whiteness. And so we tend to think about us as, the race problem is to be placed upon people who are racialized, when in reality the problem we have is with whiteness. So not my problem. But it does affect me, and it continues to affect me every day. So I wouldn't say that I have overcome it. I constantly fight it every day. I'm the only Latina on the tenure track at Harvard. I'm the only Black Latina on the tenure track at Harvard, and so that means that every time I enter into a faculty meeting, nobody looks like me, and everything I say is questioned, not based on my field of knowledge, but based on how I look and where I come from. On top of that, I come from a poor immigrant background, right? When my parents cleaned the bathrooms in a college like this, and that's what they did for a living. And so all of that comes along with me. And so the way I survive it is that I'm very good at returning the discomfort, pointing out, every time I think, was that racist? I say yes, if I'm questioning you. So I ask it, did you mean to be this racist? Or I bring attention to these kinds of structures, reminding myself that, again, this is not my problem. This is a systematic problem that's affecting everyone. And we need to confront it together. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Somebody else has the mic. Can you get up?
Yes. Hi. How do you advise your students who are experiencing challenges with navigating the ivory towerness of academia and the very real issues that are going on in their home communities? Like, there's a particular violence that academia has on people, and sometimes it feels fake, but it also feels fake. Like, oh, you know, did you mean to be that racist? Feels like a different conversation than people in my hometown have no access to healthcare.
So I think that, yes, you're absolutely right. They're different kinds of problems, right? So I'm a big fan of enacting the change that I can make. The community that I'm serving at this moment is the community of my students at Harvard who happen to have a particular challenge, right? When I'm in a different setting, that's the community that I'm serving too. That doesn't mean that I'm not cognizant and aware of the communities, of the problems that my communities are facing, because all of my family live in that community, and that means I'm getting the phone call when my dad doesn't have health care. So these are very real situations for me and for my students, and I'm extremely aware. And that informs their experiences on campus. And so my job, the way I see it, as an advocate for students of color, is to remind the administration that their issues are not just, am I going to get this A? The issues is that their parents might be undocumented and may be facing deportation even though they're citizens. The issue might be that a lot of the students, through their stipend, are also sending money back home to pay for the electric bill. So I try to raise awareness, but I am cognizant that my role in this space is to try and support these particular students who are thinking of home, but also trying to make it here precisely so that they can go back home and help their parents. So it's fake, yes, in many ways, in the sense that a lot of the conversations that we're having academically are removed from the community, and that's the biggest issue with colleges and universities. And so the question is, and the question that I keep bringing is, how do we continue to bridge this gap? Because the gap is getting bigger, and it's getting bigger for some, but for some of us, it's more pronounced, right? Like the violence is more pronounced precisely because the gap is bigger. Thank you for your question. You had a question too. Right here.
Thank you. Hi, so I'm LaShonda. I'm the Executive Director for the Institute for Recruitment of Teachers. My question is about what we're sort of seeing with tenure track numbers and sort of the availability of associate professor versus adjunct roles. What advice would you give for students of color who are interested in entering into the academy and focusing on research about their home communities, but they're still dealing with the institutional racism of the process of hiring, tenure, selection, and also mentorship? So I guess how have you sort of thought about that in your career, and how do you find even the space to think about these issues both personally and academically while supporting current students in your programs?
Thank you. So one of the most challenging things and the most difficult things is seeing the numbers, and particularly for Black women and for Black Latinas and Latinas in general. So just so you get a sense, when you start looking at the tracks, Latinas make up about 12% or so of the population of faculty in the U.S. By the time you get to tenure and promotion, we're 2%. And if you look at that by race, because the universities are great in sort of making Latinidad into this overarching way of describing, when in reality they're not looking at race and they're not looking at class. But when you actually break that down, I can't think of a single Black Latina who's a senior scholar in the US. That's really scary. Because what that shows is that we're going the degrees at the same time that Black women are the most educated population in the US. So we're getting the degrees, we're going out, but we're not getting the promotions. And the reason why we're not getting the promotion is because of many things. We're doing all of the mentoring, right? So to give you an example, I have 24 graduate students. And just so you get a sense, the typical professor has 1 or 2. I have 24. Okay, so that's not just double the work, that's many, many times the work. That work is not counted at the time that you're going up for promotion. The only thing that's looked at is research. And what we're seeing also, that when it comes to research, the way that our research is valued, if it's research that is based on community, is as non-objective or not enough. So I think the only way that we can change this is by actually having more of us coming, right? Having more of us coming to track, and having these kinds of open conversations. Because I think there's a lot of fear You know, they hand tenure over you, and then people don't speak up. But I think if we make these conversations more open, and if we have more inter-campus collaboration from community college all the way to the Ivy League, and we're talking about how this is systemic in all of our institutions, I think we might be able to change it. But we have to change it as a collective. And we're not going to do it in our individual practices.
I think I have an opposite question to that. My name's Tineida Tapia. I'm a teacher. I'm a high school teacher. I used to teach in Lawrence for roughly 14 years. And then I disagree with the receivership, so I left. So I think my question is, many of us who are activists in our communities that, you know, our parents still live in it, our families, so on and so forth, we have a hard time with academia. So what I see is I have a lot of friends who have left the field. They're either now nonprofit directors or, you know, whatever type of work that we're getting out there. And I think for me, it's very hard to stay in academia because sometimes, like we just got done with a 3-hour meeting last night, and it's almost a dissonance to go back to academia where it seems fake, back to Jessica's point. So what would you recommend for many of us that are teachers that are also activists to stay in academia? How do we form those networks when even in the academic spaces, class is a big issue? And I find that even a lot of our POC brethren we're divided by class, so it's hard to build those networks and those type of relationships.
I mean, I agree with you, and I wouldn't actively go advising people to get into academia. I mean, that wouldn't be what I would do. I mean, if I was advising my students who are trying to become academics, I would try to do my best to advise them to be the kind of teacher that I think that everyone deserves, and I do that by example. But I don't know if I have a simple advice for you, because this is the violence that I live every day, and I see it, and it's true. I don't know that it's completely different in every field, because I'm hearing it from corporate world, I'm hearing it from health fields. So I think it's a problem of hierarchies, it's a problem of class. The higher your educational level is, you're going to find sort of these ceilings. Look, none of us were, like Jean-Paul said, none of us were expected to make it. None of these institutions were created for people that look like you or look like me. So the mere existence of ourselves, the mere position of our bodies in these spaces is disruptive. It breaks, rompe, y no saben qué hacer. Right? And so people find themselves in these positions, and people of color find themselves in these positions, and a lot of them say, okay, I'm going to do what I need to do to get tenure. So I'm going to play ball. And my experience, what that does is that 7 years down the line, you don't even remember who you are. So if you start playing ball and sort of standing with the status quo, by the time you have the power to do what it was you thought you wanted to do when you first started academia as a grad student 17 years ago, you don't remember. You become this other person. So I think my advice would be for people to not go into academia. If you want to do changes in your community, you have to remind yourself every single day why you did this and why you think academia is the space to do that. And I think that's really hard to remember. It's really hard to remember.
So, keeping up with the fake theme. You know, there's a culture in any organization, and then there's a subculture. And I'm curious to know at Harvard whether that subculture, you know, when you try to fight for something that has to do with ethnicity or Latinos or any of that sort, did you get like a clear pushback, or is it more like, oh, sure, that's a great idea, let's do it, and then it's like shoved out somewhere where nobody knows?
It depended on what I was pushing for and how.
Okay.
So I would say there's both. There is sort of the, sure, we'll do that, and then we'll do it our own way. And there is the no, we're not going to do that, and here is how reprisal is going to come for trying to do it. So there is both.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
No more fake questions.
So go ahead. So Lorgia, I just want to present you a little gift from the Northern Essex Community College International Women's Committee.
Better be plátanos in there.
No, so this is something for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. So everybody, cake and pizza, help yourself. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you.